There is a country on planet Earth where you cannot choose where to live, what to wear, or even what haircut to have. A place where the government decides who you are and who you are going to be. A country with 25 million people completely isolated from the world that most of us will never be able to enter. Today we are going to uncover the most disturbing, absurd, and surprising facts about North Korea, the most secretive country in the world. North Korea's official name already works as the first clue that almost everything there needs to be read in reverse. Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It sounds like the title of a country guided by the people, but in practice, it is not a real republic, not democratic, and much less popular in any real political sense. The name sells participation, while the system delivers obedience. And that gap between
Excuse me, is this the correct form?
is exactly
Yes,
the
that's
key
right.
that begins
Please
to
fill out
explain
sections 1 and 2.
everything else.
Officer,
In
do I
much of
need
the
to attach a
world,
photo here?
Crossing a border
Yes, a
is
recent passport
bureaucracy.
photo. Next,
In
please.
North Korea, it is direct submission to the state. Entering the country already depends on special authorization, but leaving it is even more revealing because freedom of movement does not belong to the individual. It belongs to the regime. The average citizen cannot simply decide to travel, emigrate, or move around as they wish. When even the right to come and go is controlled, isolation stops being geographic and becomes a form of national imprisonment on a total scale. Today, being disconnected from the world seems almost impossible, but in North Korea, that is state policy. The vast majority of the population has no access to the global internet and lives limited to Kwangmyong, a domestic intranet with only a few authorized websites and content filtered by the regime. In practice, it is not just a lack of connection, it is control over the reality available to people. When a government decides what you can read, search, and compare, it does not just block information. It reduces your ability to realize that another life is possible. Cell phones have existed in North Korea since 2008, which at first glance may give the impression of modernization, but the decisive detail is in the limit. They only work for calls within the country itself. Contact with the outside world is another story. Unauthorized international calls can be treated as an extremely serious crime, with extreme punishments, including the death penalty. In other words, the technology comes in, but freedom does not come with it. And when even an ordinary device becomes a tool of surveillance, conversation stops being something innocent. In North Korea, even tourism seems less like a visit and more like a carefully directed performance. Foreigners can enter, but only
This
on
Grand
guided
Plaza leads to
tours
the
with
obelisk, a
constant
symbol of
supervision
victory.
and a
Observe the
previously
classical
approved
buildings, they honor
itinerary,
historical events.
with no freedom
The obelisk
to
is
move
80
around
meters
alone
tall, with a
or
star at its
explore
peak.
whatever
Wow,
they want.
impressive.
What the visitor sees is not exactly the whole country, but the version the regime accepts showing. It is like walking inside a stage where every detail was chosen to convey a specific feeling, and that makes any image from there far more suspicious than it seems. North Korea says it is a republic, but power has never circulated as it does in a real republic. Since the founding of the regime, the country passed from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il and then to Kim Jong-un, keeping command in the hands of the same family for 3 generations. In practice, this looks much more like a hereditary monarchy than any revolutionary project of popular power. The most curious part is that this succession was treated as something natural, almost inevitable, and that helps explain why the cult of the leader there goes far beyond politics. In North Korea, loyalty to the regime is not limited to squares, schools, or public buildings. It enters the home. Every household must display portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il in a prominent place, always clean, well-maintained, and treated with almost ritual respect. It is not decoration. It is a political obligation, and inspections take place to verify it. When even the living room wall becomes proof of obedience, the cult of leadership stops being symbolic and begins to occupy the most intimate space of everyday life. In North Korea, few dates reveal as much about the logic of the regime as April 15th, Kim Il-sung's birthday. The holiday is called the Day of the Sun and occupies the emotional and symbolic center of the national calendar, carrying more weight than Christmas, New Year's, or any other celebration. It is not just a tribute to the founder of the country, but a way of transforming political leadership into an almost sacred reference point. And when a nation's main celebration revolves around one man, collective time begins to obey a different logic. In North Korea, control reaches such a deep level that even the calendar was reorganized to serve the regime. The Juche system defines year 1 as 1912, the birth date of Kim Il-sung, which means that official time there does not begin with a global religious or civilizational landmark, but with the birth of the founding leader. In practice, this repositions history itself around a specific political figure. And when a government redefines even the counting of years, it also tries to redefine how a people sees its past. In North Korea, criticizing the government is not seen as disagreement. It is treated as an existential threat to the regime. One wrong word about the Kim family can send someone to forced labor camps, and the most brutal part is that the punishment can also reach up to 3 generations of the same family. In other words, fear does not fall only on the individual but on parents, children, and grandparents. When repression turns opinion into a hereditary risk, silence stops being a choice and starts functioning as a mechanism of collective survival. In North Korea, even something as ordinary as getting a haircut is subject to ideological standardization. The government maintains official lists of styles considered acceptable, with 28 options for women and 10 for men, as if personal appearance were a matter of moral security. The most ironic detail is that Kim Jong-un's famous haircut, associated with the image of the leader, does not appear among the permitted models. It seems like a small detail, but it is not. When the state regulates even people's heads, it is saying who can look like what, and who can never occupy the center. In North Korea, clothing has never been just clothing. For a long time, jeans were banned for symbolizing American imperialism, as if a fabric could carry an ideological threat. Even today, the regime continues regulating what it considers acceptable dress, reinforcing the idea that appearance is also political territory. To those watching from outside, this may seem like almost cartoonish exaggeration, but it reveals something more serious. When even the wardrobe becomes a field of symbolic dispute, the body stops belonging entirely to the person and begins serving the system. In North Korea, inequality does not depend only on money, profession, or influence. It is organized by a system called songbun, which classifies each citizen into dozens of categories according to the family's history of loyalty to the regime. This invisible label helps decide where a person can live, work, study, and even what kind of future they will have. It is not a phase, nor something easy to change. It is a permanent mark. And when a family's past defines someone's entire destiny, the country stops being only closed off and starts functioning as a frozen hierarchy. In North Korea, choosing where to live is not exactly a personal decision, but a political concession. The government controls residential distribution, and living in Pyongyang, the regime's showcase capital, is a privilege reserved for those with high songbun and a family history considered trustworthy. In other words, even your address works as a reward for loyalty. To those observing from outside, it looks like mere state centralization, but their living well means having been accepted by the machine. And that makes the city less an ordinary capital and more an ideological seal of approval. In North Korea, there are elections, but calling that a free choice requires a huge effort of imagination. For each position, there is usually only one candidate. The vote does not function as a secret expression of preference, and participation happens under the watch of the system itself. The official result borders on the absurd, approval rates close to 100%, as if disagreement simply did not exist. It looks like democracy in form, but not in essence. And when even the act of voting becomes a ritual of confirmation, politics stops being competition and becomes disciplined theater. Between 1994 and 1998, North Korea lived through a catastrophe so deep that even today its exact numbers remain shrouded in uncertainty. It is estimated that the famine killed from 250,000 up to 3 million people. The regime called this period the Arduous March, an expression that softens the horror and shifts the blame to drought, economic crisis, and external sanctions. But the most disturbing thing is how a tragedy on that scale was absorbed into the official narrative without breaking the system, and that opens an even harsher layer about who eats first and who is left with nothing. In North Korea, even food reveals the country's real hierarchy. The public distribution system, known as the PDS, does not serve everyone in the same way. Military personnel and Pyongyang residents are usually prioritized, while rural areas receive smaller and frequently insufficient rations. This means that food does not circulate only according to need, but also according to political value within the regime. To anyone looking only at the surface, it seems like a logistical failure. In practice, it is another portrait of how survival and loyalty end up mixing in a way that is hard to separate. One of the darkest layers of North Korea appears far from the official cameras, the large political prison camps. Estimates point to at least 5 such complexes, with somewhere between 80,000 and 130,000 detainees, their existence supported by satellite images and reports from refugees who managed to escape. The most disturbing part is that these places do not serve only to punish, but to erase people from public life without leaving almost any visible trace. And when a regime can hide so much suffering from a distance, fear starts working even without being seen. In North Korea, political punishment does not end with the accused person. There is a logic known as punishment of the 3 generations, by which children, parents, and even grandparents can be imprisoned together with someone accused of an ideological crime against the regime. This creates a system of fear far more efficient than individual repression, because any gesture of dissent begins to threaten the entire family tree. The result is devastating. No one needs to truly believe in order to obey. They just need to know that one mistake of theirs can condemn people who never even chose to be part of it. Even surrounded by surveillance, rigid borders, and severe punishment, North Korea has not been able to completely prevent the escape of those who decide to risk everything. More than 30,000 North Koreans have already managed to reach South Korea, and many did so by secretly crossing the border with China on routes marked by fear, trafficking, deportation, and a real risk of death.
Keep the line steady.
Each one of these escapes dismantles a piece of the regime's official narrative, and when so many people prefer the unknown to returning, the question stops being only how they escape and becomes what exactly they are escaping from. For a country with around 25 million inhabitants, maintaining approximately 1.3 million active soldiers is not just a military choice, it is a statement about national priority. North Korea sustains one of the largest armies on the planet, something that helps explain why defense, discipline, and collective mobilization occupy such a central space in the country's life. It is not only about protection against external threats, but about a society shaped by a permanent logic of readiness. And when a state organizes itself like that, even civilian routine begins to look like a barracks. In North Korea, mandatory military service is not a short stage of youth, but a huge piece of life itself. Men may serve for up to 11 years, while women may serve for around 7, in one of the longest compulsory systems in the world. This changes education, work, relationships, and even the pace at which adult life begins. To those looking from outside, it seems like just extreme defense policy, but the real effect is deeper. When the state occupies so many years of your body and your time, it also occupies a decisive part of your future. Few images explain North Korea as clearly as the nighttime satellite view. While South Korea appears shining like an intense web of lights, North Korean territory appears almost entirely submerged in darkness, with the exception of a few isolated points. It is not a dramatic visual effect. It is the reflection of a severe shortage of electricity that affects daily life in a concrete way. And when an entire country disappears from the planet's luminous map, darkness stops being a metaphor. It becomes visible evidence of everything that is missing behind the propaganda. Few places summarize the logic of North Korean staging, as well as Kijongdong, the so-called ghost town built in the demilitarized zone. From a distance, it looks like a normal village, with painted buildings, flags, and the appearance of organized life. But reports indicate that there are no real residents there, and that even the lights follow fixed schedules as part of a carefully mounted spectacle. It is not exactly a city, it is a visual message to the other side of the border. And when even an entire landscape can be built as propaganda, it becomes hard to know where the scenery ends and reality begins. In North Korea, even having a dog can become an ideological issue. In 2013, reports emerged that the regime banned pet dogs in Pyongyang, treating this habit as a symbol of a Western bourgeois lifestyle, incompatible with the values defended by the system. It may sound like an almost absurd detail, but it is exactly this kind of rule that shows how far control tries to reach, not only into what people do in public, but also into domestic affection and private signs of status. And when even a companion animal becomes suspicious, propaganda has already taken up too much space. In North Korea, even the largest stadium in the world helps tell a story about power. The Rungrado 1st of May Stadium in Pyongyang has a capacity of about 114,000 people and impresses less because of the sport itself than because of the symbolic function it serves. It is used mainly for parades, mass performances, and major propaganda events, where thousands of synchronized bodies convey the message the regime wants to display. And when even a monumental arena serves more to stage obedience than to celebrate freedom, the spectacle reveals more about the country than it seems. North Korea is, without a doubt, one of the most enigmatic and disturbing places on the planet. A country where 25 million people live in a reality completely different from ours, without being able to question, without being able to leave, without even being able to imagine that there is a different world out there. If this video opened your mind about something you had never stopped to think about, leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. If you want to see more videos like this about countries and cultures that few people know, subscribe here and turn on the bell. See you next time.